Thanks so much for joining us for the webinar today. My name is Braden McNeil. I'm the Technical Sales and Marketing Lead here at Aquanti. If you ever have any questions about hydrogeosphere, I would be the person to speak to. Today we welcome Drs. Tang and Lars Nerger to present on HGS-PDAF, a new tool which brings together hydrogeosphere with powerful real-time data assimilation software. Before we begin, I do want to highlight that this webinar is being recorded, and as the event is being delivered in a webinar format, all attendees' microphones are muted by default, but I do encourage the audience to leave any questions that they may have in the chat as we go through the presentation, and we'll be sure to have some time at the end of the presentations to respond to questions and have a bit of a discussion. So we're here today to learn a little bit about HGS-PDAF version 1.0. This is an innovative new tool to improve hydrologic modeling practices developed collaboratively by researchers at the University of Neuchâtel, the German Meteorological Survey, and the Alfred Wegener Institute, Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. HGS-PDAF integrates the surface and subsurface hydrologic model hydrogeosphere, or HGS, with real-time data assimilation software, PDAF, in order to enhance the accuracy of water resources predictions. In this presentation, the team will demonstrate the features of HGS-PDAF and its effectiveness through a river-aquifer model, showcasing how it leverages high-performance computing to provide reliable insights for both research and practical applications in water management. Key developers of HGS-PDAF include Dr. Tang and Dr. Lars Nerger, both of whom will be contributing to this webinar today. Dr. Nerger is a senior scientist at the Alfred Wegener Institute, AWI, Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research in Bremerhaven, Germany. He leads the Data Assimilation Group in the Computing Center of AWI and has over 20 years of experience in data assimilation. His research focuses on Earth system data assimilation, particularly the development of ensemble-based data assimilation methods and their application in the ocean and ocean biogeochemistry. He also leads the development of the open source software PDAF, Parallel Data Assimilation Framework, one of the most widely used software systems for data assimilation worldwide. Dr. Tang is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Basel and the coordinator of the Swiss Water Earth Systems PhD school based at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. With a bachelor's degree in applied mathematics and a master's degree in hydrology, she initiated her exploration into data assimilation and hydrological modeling during her doctoral studies. With over 10 years of experience in the field, she has expertly applied data assimilation techniques to a wide range of numerical models, spanning from catchment scale hydrogeological modeling to global scale Earth systems modeling. I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to deliver this presentation to the Aquanti network. And without any further ado, I'll invite Lars to begin his presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My part is intended to be rather short so that we have enough time for the actual application for this HGS PDAF application, and I will be talking about generally ensemble data assimilation, so those methods that we use in the software, and on the open source software Parallel Data Assimilation Framework. Just to mention as a first step, so at the Alfred Wegener Institute, we do research on methodology, as Braden mentioned. Current focus is nonlinear data assimilation, since models get more and more nonlinear, so we need better methods for this. The assimilation software, which basically means we put our developments, our research, also community provides research results, so new algorithms. Okay, coming back to this slide, so we do methodology research, with currently focus on nonlinear data assimilation. We develop the software for our own use and then also to provide it as a nice tool to the community. Our community developments go into this assimilation software, and we also run actual applications of data assimilation. And at my institute, we have a focus on climate and ocean and marine biogeochemistry. So these are applications that we are running. So, for example, marine biogeochemistry, ocean physics, carbon cycle, also coupled ocean atmosphere data assimilation in climate models. This is important for us to run data assimilation also in big applications, because the pure filters are nice mathematically, but cannot be used. So you need some methods to make the filters usable for high-dimensional models. And these applications with high-dimensional models give us the experience to know what methods do we use, and those we implement also in PDAF, so to provide them to users to make the applications really usable. And finally, then we provide support for data assimilation applications, so asking questions on PDAF which are not solved by our documentation. Overall, one point I have to stress with this list and the applications that you see, actually, I have no idea about hydrological modeling, so I'm coming from the algorithmic side, but it's always nice to work with people from researchers with other experience to see how the data assimilation then is applied and works in other applications, so like hydrological applications. Yeah, I want here to talk, about data assimilation in general at first. And yeah, what is data assimilation? We have on the one hand models like HGS, and then we have observations. And as long as we have some models simulating dynamics over time, and we have observations, then we can do data assimilation. Data assimilation then means we combine with these both sources of information. So the models provide us information, observations, in a quantitative way, and as optimal as possible by a computer algorithm. Optimal means also it involves that we account for uncertainties or errors in both the models and the observations. That's one aspect that characterizes data assimilation, that we really take into account the different error characteristics and error correlations which we have, and this leads to data assimilation. We can then do a wide range of possible applications. Overall, data assimilation can be characterized as observation-constrained modeling. If we talk about ensemble data assimilations, even observation-constrained ensemble modeling, and the ensemble gives us uncertainty information. With that, the model learns from observations. One could say data assimilation is a very long time established machine learning methods, because the model really learns from observation. Particularly, we also take into account uncertainties in both the observations and the model. And then the classical application would be initializing weather forecasts. This is where data assimilation came from. So we can do an optimal estimation of our model system that can be initial conditions, weather forecasts for a very long time. Nowadays, there are also operational forecasts for oceans. One can estimate a whole state trajectory. So like the whole atmospheric state over the last 50 years, that's called reanalysis. We can estimate parameters. With parameters, I mean process parameters. That's particular in like hydrological applications, when you want to characterize like how the ground is structured, but also in the ocean and atmosphere models, and in biogeochemistry, we have various parameters that control the dynamics. Can also estimate fluxes. In ocean atmosphere applications, that's often heat flux. In biogeochemistry, that's primary production, how much carbon is taken up by the biology. So we can estimate those with data assimilation. We can also estimate boundary conditions, or what we call forcing. So like an ocean model always needs an atmosphere to drive the ocean. And the atmosphere that we get is always wrong. So what we could do is estimating that atmosphere that gives us the best ocean state. And some applications do this. There are also more advanced applications of data assimilation, which we do nowadays more and more. And that's improvements of the model formulation and improvements of the observation system. We can detect systematic errors with data assimilation, more than just comparing model with observations, so they will be different. If we assimilate and then analyze how far we still need to correct within the data assimilation, that shows us really where the model, say, runs away from the observation, where it rejects observation. And this gives us a really nice information about errors in the systematic errors in the models. We can also essentially estimate parameterization. So not just parameter values, but estimating which parameterizations, which functional formulation is more likely and produces better estimates. And finally, one can also detect relevant observations or valuable observations that helps us in observation system design. So particularly think about you want to do measurements in the ocean, need to go there with a ship. A ship cruise is always expensive, and you want to take the observations at those locations, which is really important, where the observations are not just neutral, but add additional information. And probably in hydrological or land-ground applications, you probably, if you want to drill a hole somewhere to measure water, groundwater there, you probably want to know where it is relevant to do this. And data assimilation gives you sensitivities for this, so that you better know where to put your observations. We have a certain focus on ensemble data assimilation, and there is a methodology introduced now about 30 years ago by G. Evensen, which is called ensemble Kalman filter. So on the one hand, they do Kalman filter, but we use ensembles. And nowadays, newer filters are then particle filters, which are fully nonlinear. Kalman filters assume certain normal or Gaussian distributions. They also work if the model is nonlinear, surprisingly well, but particle filters are the fully nonlinear methods, but they are more difficult to apply. The sketch here shows a bit what we want to do. So we have at some, and let me get my pointer here. We have at some initial time a state estimate, the dot and the ellipse is essentially showing uncertainty. And so basically it says higher uncertainty in the vertical direction, and the second dimension is a horizontal direction, all at a fixed time. And at later times, we have observations, different values, and the ellipse shows, larger ellipse shows observations have a higher error. Now we want to use them in ensemble data assimilation, and that means we first need to generate an ensemble. An initial sampling that represents the state estimate and the uncertainty estimate. So both the dot and the ellipse. We integrate this in time. So we take the model and integrate this whole ensemble in time. Ensemble size might be something like 10 samples or 50 samples. We hardly work with more than 50 samples. That gives us an estimate at a later time where we have observations. Then we need to combine the two information. From the model and from the observation, accounting for the uncertainties, that gives us a new state estimate, the black dot, and a new error estimate, which is lower than the single estimates here for the forecast and the observation. So this step is called analysis. Then we need to generate a new ensemble. And nowadays methods typically combine both analysis and ensemble transformation in one step. This gives us an ensemble that represents an updated state estimate and an updated uncertainty estimate. And from this, you can go on further in time, but you can also go backward in time, is what we call smoothing. So the gray ellipse and dot here takes into account future observations. So that is a possibility if we do reruns. So if after a month, if we rerun the month, we have observations 1 month in the future, and we can do such smoothing with future observation is particularly valuable for estimation of such process parameters. And as mentioned, we can go further in time forward. The green boxes we see here are the different steps which are involved. And actually, there was a lot of research over the last 20, 30 years in how to perform these operations, which operations are closer to optimal or even optimal, how to best do them in highly dimensional cases. In highly dimensional, I mean something like state size of 1 million, 10 million, or even more. We now know most of these steps can be implemented in generic form, and exactly this is what we do in our data assimilation software. So in PDAF, we know from research what methods work well, how to do these different steps, and then in the data assimilation software, we have implemented these steps to make them easily usable. So that leads us to PDAF. Yeah, it's a software, and basically you can see it as a unified tool. So different parts of data assimilation all included there for really interdisciplinary data assimilation. That goes far beyond actually the Earth system. I mentioned some examples later. So always if you have a time-dependent model and observations related to the model, you can do data assimilation. And then PDAF as a framework allows you to, well, you get support for ensemble simulations for this uncertainty estimate, and some application actually you really just run ensembles without data assimilation. We can augment a model with data assimilation functionality. PDAF provides the different methods for both ensemble and also for variational data assimilation. I didn't talk here really about variational. It's a different way of how to get the analysis solution incorporating the observations. And then we aim for an easy integration of observation operators. So those that compute the observed counterpart of the model so that we can relate that to observations. You can run this on a notebook if your model is small enough, but PDAF is also right away able to run on supercomputers. We have applications even running up to 30,000 or 50,000 processor cores. So these are really high-dimensional systems. You can apply data assimilation, real applications. We use it also to study our assimilation algorithms, either in toy models or in real models. You implement them once, and then we use them, and we can also use it to teach data assimilation. It's easy enough, the system, or you can do easy enough setups that you can teach data assimilation. Everything then follows the separation of concerns, which we now in software design nowadays is important. Model development, observation handling, data assimilation methods developments are separate aspects which are separated in the software design here, and this also allows users to an easy uptake of new methods. We put them in PDAF, new data assimilation method, in a way that is more or less directly usable than by the users. Everything here is open source. So we have a website, this PDF at AWIDE has a lot of documentation, and then the code is on GitHub. So that's something that's available. The software itself is in Fortran. We are currently working on a Python interface. There's a publication under review for this, so that will also be coming, which will make some coding aspects easier. When we couple now a model in the assimilation or PDAF. So we need to interface basically the model representation of, say, model fields with our assimilation program. And we have two approaches for this. And here on the left, we see what we call an offline coupling. And that basically the blue side, the model, typical model setup, you initialize a model, you do time stepping, you do post-processing, and well, the model will start from some restart files, usually, and it will restart files at the end. And here you can just run, say, an ensemble of 20 models. Then you have 20 restart files, and then you have a separate program for the assimilation, and that will read this restart files, will perform the analysis step, and write new restart files, which you give back to the models. And then you have these separate programs. Many operational centers actually use such a separate setup, and you can, for big applications, if you're on a big cluster, you always have to set up compute jobs, and each model can be a separate compute job. A bit limited is this if for big applications that you have a lot of file reading and writing, and you have the model restarts, and this is a bit of overhead. But there are applications where the overheads are very low relative to the actual runtime of the model. The other approach that we use is what we call online. In online, we directly go into the model code and add, and these are the green parts, we just add 4 subroutine calls or 4 function calls for changing initialization, for changing parallelization, to run an ensemble, to initialize the data assimilation here in HGS-PDAF, to assimilate during the time stepping, and then to finalize and perhaps writing an ensemble of restart files. So we adapt the model source code. It's not really complicated to do. An advantage is for big application, we can run this as one large compute job. And on some computers, it's really easier to say, I want one compute job with 1,000 processor cores, instead of I want 20 compute jobs with 50 processor cores each. So, and that's why this can be on some computers, it can be better for this large application. It's also computationally very efficient, since the transfer between model and data assimilation is in memory and not via files. So you can reduce the amount of files or the amount of disk space that you use. So that's another approach that we have for actually for hydrogeosphere, for HGS here. We use the offline coupling, separate programs, since obviously we don't have access to the model source code, but it's small enough, it's fast enough that this does not, that the overheads are relatively low. So we can do this. So we have on the one hand the model where we can run the ensemble. We use the restart files from the model and then feed them to the PDAF program for the analysis step. We generate updated files, which we can give back to the model and do the next cycle, the next forecast round. And this is how it is now implemented in the HGS PDAF, and Chi will talk more about that. Just as one more note, sometimes it's even too heavy to run a full ensemble, and there are also possibilities to run a single model and use other information to represent essentially the ensemble, and then the application gets somewhat cheaper. The skill of the data assimilation will be lower, and often it is good enough, and then that is also usable. And in preparation for what she will be talking about in the structure of HGS-PDAF, is when we look into how do we implement such an ensemble filter analysis step. So what we have from the code design in PDAF is we use so-called callback routines or callback functions. So basically, when you think about having this coupled to a model, the model calls this PDAF analysis step routine, and then PDAF will call other functions which are user-coded and basically which can directly connect to the model. Similarly, we do this in this offline, that basically the main program, the driver calls PDAF, PDAF calls callback routines. And that gives a very clean code structure, and the routines that you code are usually quite simple. One part that we need is the model interface is basically the model stores parameters, process parameters, which you can use, or stores model fields in some model-specific way. But the data assimilation is just acting on what we call state vectors. An ensemble of state vectors is just an abstract state vector. We don't really need to know in the assimilation program what really is stored in there. So the model interface is interfacing between model fields and state vector. Then we might need something for localization. Localization basically says, okay, we distribute our analysis, our correction step, not in one big correction, but we use observations which are closer by some grid points and only use this. For high-dimensional models, this is something which is quite important. And finally, we have an observation module. to initialize observation information, apply observation operators, that basically means computes the observed model state, and perhaps some functions for localization of observation. And all these boxes essentially represent callback function. And these are readily implemented then in HGS-PDAF. Before I come to the summary, I just wanted to point out actually PDAF is widely used. We have some operational users, like in Germany, the forecasting for the North Sea and Baltic Sea, so the seas that are close by to the German coast, is done by a model coupled to PDAF. Also in the European frame, here, the forecasting center for the Baltic Sea is using PDAF with a different ocean model. And in China, there are operation application of sea ice prediction for the Arctic, which are run with data assimilation with PDAF. Coming from the ocean, we have a lot of ocean applications. Some at RV, many worldwide, spread out with various different models. I don't need to explain the different models here. So it's just names, but a very wide range of different models, either ocean physics, sea ice, biogeochemistry, also some coupled models, ocean atmosphere or real climate models, including paleoclimate. Paleoclimate basically means you do data assimilation over some thousand years. There is some data to assimilate, and then PDAF can be used. And then beyond the ocean, we have applications, so like hydrogeosphere. TSMP is there as a coupled atmosphere, land surface, groundwater model. Atmosphere models are coupled, and then other models, so like geodynamo, that's the Earth's magnetic field. Volcanic ash transport application we have with PDAF, or really going away from Earth system is cadiotic modeling. That's basically modeling and assimilation of how pacemakers work. There's also data and its time dependence. There's a model you can do data assimilation. An important part here is also assimilation. It's always the same assimilation software. So this really leverages synergies. You implement things once, you exchange experience with the data assimilation software and the problems that might arise. Yeah, let me wrap this up. So I talked about ensemble data assimilation, which is what we mainly do with PDAF, and that allows us for such observation constraint modeling. And then the model learns from the observations over time, either the model state or the model parameters, process parameters. And we get an ensemble that provides uncertainty estimates for the various fields and perhaps parameters which you have in the model. And PDAF is such a unified tool, so where you can do data assimilation really in an interdisciplinary way. We have a standardized interface to the data assimilation methods, and with this you get simpler access to data assimilation methods, because it's all, even for for complex application, everything that you need is implemented and ready to use, even with parallelization, even for very high dimensional applications. And then you can use this either for small models or for really like complex high resolution climate models running on supercomputers. Yeah, that's all what I wanted to talk about. So thank you for your attention, and then I hand over to Chi.
Thank you, Lars, for the insightful presentation for the data assimilation and the PDAF software. And thank you, Braden, for organizing such a webinar where we can share our experience with data assimilation with hydrogeosphere. And in the next about 30 minutes, I'll give a short introduction on our newly developed data assimilation framework, which is called HGS-PDAF. As we've seen, PDAF provides powerful tools for implementing data assimilation algorithm efficiently. And based on this, I'm going to focus on how we can take advantage of PDAF by coupling it with hydrogeosphere. And I'd like to begin with a simple example to show how data assimilation works for a hydrological model. We've set up a synthetic 3D river-aquifer model with hydrogeosphere. And the model has a domain size of 500 meters by 300 meters, and with in horizontal direction, and has a vertical length or depth of 30 meters. And on top of the model domain, we place a river with 20-meter wide and 2-meter deep. Water flows along this y-axis, and two pumping wells are also included to extract groundwater from the aquifer to control the groundwater level. And this is to increase or to create a dynamic system for our study. And we also implemented heterogeneous hydraulic conductivity fields to introduce variability and complexity in our system. And to carry out data assimilation experiment, we also place 8 observation wells with virtually observed hydraulic heads. And for the data assimilation, we use an observation error of 5 centimeter. The data assimilation method we use is ensemble common filter, the standard one, with an ensemble size of 100. And the simulation and assimilation period is 96 days with an updating frequency of 1 day. And we also implemented inflation factor of 0.1. But this only happens when we update parameters together with state variables to avoid ensemble collapse and to increase the ensemble diversity. And for this test case, we don't use any localization. This means the observation, there's no restriction for observations, and the observation is assumed to have impact on the whole model domain. And this figure shows the difference between the simulated and the observed hydraulic heads for at one randomly selected observation point. On the left-hand side, we have the results from the open loop run, where no data assimilation was performed. On the right-hand side, other assimilation runs where both the model state and parameters are updated with NKF. One thing I forgot to mention is these two pumping wells can be switched on and off during different time period. And in this case, go back. Okay, yeah. And in this scenario, we switch on the pumping well at the beginning 16 days, and afterwards we switch it off for 50 days, and then we switch it on again for the remaining 30 days until the end of the simulation period. Okay, and we notice the key difference during the pumping periods. And in the open loop run, without data assimilation, we see the simulated heads, which is shown in orange line. The simulated heads deviate more significantly from the observed data. And in the assimilation run, the simulated heads are much closer to the observed values. And this demonstrates how data assimilation effectively improves the accuracy of our hydrological model by continually updating it with real-time data. And the prediction are much more aligned with reality. And this is exactly our motivation for developing such a data assimilation framework for hydrogeosphere. To increase the robustness and reliability for operational forecasting. An introduction of hydrogeosphere. So as introduced already by the title of this presentation, HGS-PDAF couples two robust systems, the hydrological model, HGS, hydrogeosphere, is a physically based, fully integrated subsurface, surface hydrological model, which can simulate the surface and subsurface water flow process in one framework. And the parallel data assimilation framework PDAF, which is scalable and efficient software for incorporating real-time data into even large-scale models. And our developed HGS-PDAF aims to bridge the gap between the theoretical hydrological model and real-world applications. And this slides outline the workflow of data assimilation with PDAF, with HGS-PDAF. So on the left-hand side, we see the standard procedure of running and post-processing a pure HGS model. The executable grok and PHGS these two executables are used to pre-process and run HGS respectively. And HGS-plot, this executable is used to post-process the HGS output. And on the right-hand side, we extended with data assimilation. So at each time step, first we start with the HGS model, and if observation data is available, HGS-PDAF, these model bindings come in. These model bindings consist of user-specified subroutines, which act as an interface between the model and the PDAF source code. And PDAF is called inside HGS-PDAF to perform data assimilation. And after that, after data assimilation is done, the model state is updated. And depending on our requirement, it can also update the model parameter. And this updated state and parameter. Oops. Okay. And these updated state and parameters values are used as the initial condition for the next time step. And this process is repeated for each time step until looped over all the time steps. And this whole process is managed by a driver, which are a number of run scripts written in Bash and Python. And this slide details the workflow for handling each ensemble state during the data assimilation process. HGS begins by initializing from the restart files, and these restart files contain the model state at a particular time step, which are important for continuing the simulation from where it left out. And next, the HGS model evolves forward into the in time and write out the new restart files. And afterwards, HGS-PDAF comes in and it reads the key variables in these restart files and write them into the output file, netcdf file, mark them as forecast. And then data assimilation is performed and the key variable are updated. And HGS-PDAF will write this output into the netcdf file again and mark them as the analysis. And afterwards, these updated variables are written to the restart files again by HGS-PDAF by replacing the old one, which will be used as the initial conditions for the next time step. And for each observation type, we use independent observation operator module for reading and handling. And besides this, we also provide pre-process tools for dealing with the raw observations and the post-processing tools for analyzing and visualizing the result. And the current version of our HGS-PDAF allows us to update the state variables, including the hydraulic head, the ground, the water, the soil moisture, noble gas concentrations, and also the model parameters like the hydraulic conductivity and porosity. And observation types, which can be assimilated separately or jointly, include the piezometric heads, the soil moisture, and the noble gas concentrations. We tested the scalability of HGS-PDAF using the synthetic 3D model we showed earlier. We run the test case, the test on Uli supercomputer in Germany, and we vary the ensemble size starting from 2 and doubling it until up to 100. And this result shows as the ensemble size increase, the running time also increase, but only by about 50% with an ensemble size of 100. Okay, and until now, we have already explored the technical background and the performance of HGS-PDAF. And now we can shift our focus on how we can get started using this framework. And first step is to download the source code. If you are comfortable with Git, then you can easily use git clone or SVN checkout to download the repository to your local machine. And otherwise, you can also find it on the Zenodo repository, which provides the same files as GitHub does. And after you have the code on your local machine, it's ready to compile, and you can follow the instructions in the README file to compile the source code, and then run the test case, which we show the synthetic 3D case, which is also provided in this repository to see how HGS-PDAF works. And this slide shows a screenshot of the GitHub repository, how the structure of the code, how that it look like. There you will find the documentation which provides a detailed description on HGS-PDAF, and the example, the 3D synthetic model, and the source code HGS, which is called HGS-PDAF, as Lars already mentioned. It's an offline coupling, and also some necessary libraries to read and write the HGS output, and name list files where 2 files are provided to define the parameters for data assimilation, and the pre-process and post-processing tools are stored here. We also provide a folder with a number of run scripts which you can use for different Linux clusters, and the README files which you can follow the instructions to compile the model, the HGS-PDAF. And the Zenodo repository has a mirror files for the GitHub. And if you are an advanced user and if you want to do the following things, like assimilate a new observation type, or adding new variable into the state vector, or using different types of filters, because currently we only use the ensemble command filter. And if you want to use localization or heterogeneous observation errors, you can just reach out by sending me an email, and I'm very happy to help. Okay. And since we still have some time left, I think I'd like to show another application of HGS-PDAF. And this study explored whether groundwater recharge can be predicted based on our data assimilation framework and by assimilating soil moisture data. And we also aim to determine if evaporation can also be predicted together with groundwater recharge. And for this purpose, we set up a NARC model which can simulate infiltration, evaporation, and soil moisture. We apply data assimilation using soil moisture data from lysimeters to forecast both the recharge and the evaporation. We use a 1D color model with a horizontal dimension of 1 meter by 1 meter. And in vertical direction, it has 150 layers with constant depths of 1 centimeter per layer. The boundary conditions include the precipitation and potential evapotranspiration. These data are from meteospace, and regular irrigation of 10 liter or 20 liters per day when the soil, the surface layer of the soil is dry, and with free drainage at the bottom layer. And model parameters cover soil properties, including the parameters to describe the water retention curve, saturated hydraulic conductivity, porosity, residue saturation, and so on, and vegetation and evaporation properties. And this slide shows the time series data for precipitation, potential evapotranspiration, and irrigation used in our model. And this slide gives the histogram of the hydraulic conductivity and porosity distribution across 128 realizations. And these distributions actually represent the uncertainty of our model in key soil parameters. And both of them have Gaussian distributions. And for the data assimilation configuration, the data assimilation method we use is still the standard ensemble common filter. And the ensemble size this time is 128. And for the observations, we have the soil moisture data at 4 different depths on top from 10 centimeter to 9 centimeter. And the simulation and assimilation period is 1 year. The update variables include the soil moisture and hydraulic conductivity. We test it by updating these variables every 1 day, 5 days, and 20 days. And the soil moisture data is measured by a lysimeter located at Helmholtz close to Zurich in Switzerland. And the soil type at this site is a sandy loam. This lysimeter is covered by permanent grass land and irrigated regularly. And this lysimeter continuously measures the soil moisture, the temperature, suction, and seepage, and providing daily data. This figure shows the time series of soil moisture measurements at 4 different depths by the lysimeter. And this data, these are the original measured data, and this data will be converted to soil water saturation because this is the soil water saturation is the variable we use in hydrogeosphere. And the following slides, we will compare the results between the open loop run and the 3 assimilation runs, each assimilation run with different update frequency. And in this slide, we focus on the ensemble mean of the soil water saturation at different depths. The observed data is shown as a dashed black line, and the open loop one is represented by a solid blue line. And at 30 and 90 centimeters depths, we observed that after 200 days and until 320 days, perhaps, the simulated water saturation from all assimilation runs are much more closer with the observed data compared to the open loop run, especially at the deeper depths, for example, at 90 centimeter. And this slide shows the ensemble mean of accumulative drainage and evapotranspiration for both the open loop run and the free assimilation runs. And on the left-hand side are the accumulated drainage. Compared to the measurement, which is shown as a dashed green line, the open loop run, which is shown in blue solid line, overestimate the accumulated drainage. And with data assimilation, especially when the updating frequency is reduced, which is shown in red and green here, the simulated results become much closer to the observed data. And on the right-hand side, we see the accumulated evapotranspiration. And for it, the simulation runs gave slightly better results compared to the open loop run. These are the 3 simulation runs, and the blue line represents the open loop run, and this is the observation. And in summary, we developed a couple of data assimilation framework for hydrogeosphere. And with this framework, we can assimilate different types of observations alone or jointly. And we can update the state and parameters alone or jointly. And the performance of the developed system, HGS-PDAF, has been evaluated with 2 test cases. And for the first one, the synthetic 3D model, we found the state of the model can be reasonable where constrained by data assimilation, particularly during the pumping period. And for the 1D column model, we found data assimilation can improve the simulation accuracy of drainage by simulating the soil moisture. And in the end, I'd like to acknowledge the EU project, EU 2020 project Water Agri, which fund my work, and the HPC quota granted by the Jülich supercomputing centers, the 2 supercomputers, Eureka and Yusuf. Yeah, and that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.